Margaret froze as she read the journal she'd found in her son David's house. Mom will never admit Sarah was right, but the truth is so different, read the first page. David had died of a sudden heart attack 2 weeks ago. Margaret, 58, was going through her son's belongings when she found this leather-bound journal in David's desk drawer. The cover read, "Private, mine only," in David's handwriting. Margaret's first instinct was to put the journal back without reading it, but curiosity got the better of her. When she opened the first page, she was confronted with truths that would shake the foundation of her 20-year marriage. Margaret's problem with Sarah had started from the very first day her son David met her. At the time, David was 28 and had been engaged to Jennifer for 3 years. Jennifer was the daughter of Linda, Margaret's best friend, a medical school graduate from a wealthy family, the suitable bride candidate in Margaret's eyes. Margaret had already planned the wedding preparations in her head and started dreaming about future grandchildren with Jennifer. But one day when David came home, he said he and Jennifer had broken up. Margaret was shocked. Why? What happened? Did you have a fight? She asked in panic. David just said, "We don't get along, Mom. This marriage won't work." Margaret thought this was a temporary crisis and tried to convince David to make up with Jennifer. 3 months later, when David said he had met Sarah, Margaret's world collapsed. Sarah was just an ordinary elementary school teacher from a middle-class family. This stranger had replaced all the dreams Margaret had built with Jennifer. When they first met, Margaret looked Sarah up and down, unable to hide her disappointment behind her mask of politeness. "This woman is not at our level," Margaret would constantly tell her neighbor friends. "She must have bewitched David. Beauty is temporary, but character is permanent." Margaret thought Sarah loved David for his money, even though David was an accountant working on a moderate salary. When David announced his marriage decision, Margaret didn't speak to her son for months. She wouldn't answer the phone or allow him to come to her house. Even when neighbors intervened and said, "Don't lose your son," Margaret was stubborn. "He lost me, not the other way around," she would reply. At the wedding, she put on forced smiles, but her heart was like stone. She avoided meeting Sarah's family and only made the necessary polite sentences. Margaret's tension was clearly visible in the wedding photos. Sarah, even on that day, tried to say loving words to Margaret, saying, "I'm so happy. Margaret, you raised a wonderful son." Margaret looked at these words with suspicion. In the first years of marriage, Margaret displayed calculated coldness towards Sarah. At family gatherings, she would only have necessary conversations with her, ignoring David's happiness. Sarah bringing food, buying gifts, remembering birthdays, didn't soften Margaret. "She's showing off," she thought. "She's trying to impress David's family." When the subject of grandchildren came up, Margaret's attitude became even harsher. "I hope you have children so we can see how Sarah can raise them," she would make sarcastic comments. Although David was uncomfortable with his situation, he didn't want to argue with his mother. Sarah remained silent against Margaret's criticisms, trying not to put David in the middle. Even when Margaret learned that Sarah was pregnant, she showed no joy. When David gave the good news, Margaret's first reaction was, "I hope she becomes a good mother." During pregnancy, Sarah's health problems were proof to Margaret that Sarah was weak. Jennifer wouldn't have been so spoiled, she thought to herself. When her granddaughter Emma was born, Margaret's heart softened, but her pride wouldn't let her show it. Emma was a beautiful baby, very much like Sarah. When Margaret held the baby in her arms at the hospital, her love for her granddaughter was mixed with the coldness she felt toward Sarah. "She doesn't know how to discipline this child," she would whisper to her neighbors. "Working mothers can't spend enough time with their children." Sarah, being a working mother, was the main target of Margaret's criticism. "She leaves her child at daycare and goes to work," she would say in phone conversations. "Mothers used to raise children at home in the old days." Margaret didn't know that Sarah had to work due to their financial situation. When David wanted to explain to his mother, Sarah stopped him. "Let her think that way. She wouldn't believe it, even if you told her." As the years passed, family tension increased. David was caught in the middle, trying to please both his mother and his wife, but this situation began to negatively affect their marriage as well. Sarah gradually withdrew due to Margaret's constant criticism. She would avoid family dinners and feel tense around Margaret. As Emma grew up, she began to notice this tension and asked one day, "Why doesn't Grandma play with me much?" As Margaret turned the pages of the journal, she had difficulty reading what her son had written over the years. Each page was a new source of regret. March 15, 2018, Mom made another comment about Sarah's work today. She doesn't want to see what a good person Sarah is. She doesn't know how Sarah stands by me through the nights, how she protects me when I'm sick. Mom still thinks Jennifer would have been better, but Mom doesn't know how Jennifer left me alone when I needed her most. Margaret's heart stopped. Had Jennifer left David alone? Why had David never said anything? The journal continued. August 22, 2019. Mom says Sarah comes from a poor family, but she doesn't know that Sarah sends half her salary to her sick father. Mom criticizes her work, but if Sarah quit her job, Mom would say she's exploiting David. Sarah never complains, but I see how much she's hurt. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She didn't even know that Sarah's father was sick. Every line she read, page by page, was destroying her prejudices about Sarah. December 30th, 2020. Emma asked today why her grandmother doesn't pay much attention to her. She asked Sarah, "Does Grandma love me?" Sarah told Emma that her grandmother loves her very much, but sometimes has trouble expressing herself. The fact that Sarah tried to protect my mother even in this situation both moved me and made me ashamed. Margaret covered her face with her hands. Her granddaughter had felt unloved, and Sarah had tried to make even that okay. The most painful truth was in this sentence. February 5, 2021. Mom doesn't realize that Sarah has always shown her respect. Sarah never forced me to choose between her and my mother. When my other friends have wife-mother problems, their wives say, "Choose me or her." Sarah never did that, but I'm ashamed of my mother's attitude. Sarah is a much bigger person than I am. Margaret closed the journal and leaned back in the chair she was sitting in. For 20 years, she had wrongly accused her daughter-in-law. Sarah really was a woman who made David happy, raised Emma wonderfully, was a mother and wife who tried to remain respectful despite Margaret. She remembered Sarah's behavior at David's funeral. When Margaret was crying, Sarah had tried to comfort her, saying, "David talked about you a lot. He always told me how much he loved you." She had encouraged Emma to hug her grandmother, saying, "Go hug your grandmother. She's very sad too." Even on that difficult day, Sarah seemed to have forgotten the difficulties Margaret had put her through for years. Margaret picked up the phone and called Sarah. After the phone rang 3 times, Sarah answered. "Margaret, is everything okay? Is there a problem with Emma?" For the first time in 20 years, Margaret noticed the genuine concern in her daughter-in-law's voice. Sarah was still trying to get along well with her. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can I come over?" "Of course, Margaret. My door is always open." An hour later, Margaret was at Sarah's door. When Sarah let her in, there were photos of David in every corner of the house. Happy family moments, photos of Emma growing up, even old photos of David with Margaret were on the walls. "Sarah," Margaret said, with a tremor in her voice, "I've done you a great injustice for 20 years. I read David's journal. I misunderstood everything." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't take an accusatory attitude toward Margaret. "Margaret, let's leave it in the past. David loved both of us." "No," Margaret said firmly. "The mistake is mine. You were a perfect wife, a perfect mother, and a perfect daughter-in-law. I didn't want to see this because I clung to my own prejudices." They talked for hours that day. Margaret listened to Sarah's happy memories with David, learned about the sweet events Emma experienced while growing up. Sarah told her how much David talked about Margaret, how much he loved his mother. For the first time, Margaret began to really get to know Sarah and realized what a strong, selfless, and patient woman she was. Months passed. Margaret now visited Sarah several times a week and spent time with Emma. Her granddaughter had started calling her Grandma, and Margaret had been able to form a real bond with her. Margaret was sad every day about the 20 years she had lost, but she was focused on making up for the remaining time. A year later, at Emma's 16th birthday, Margaret gave a speech. 20 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. Instead of trying to get to know Sarah, I acted on my prejudices. I didn't want to see this wonderful woman who made David happy and raised Emma beautifully. But now I know that David's best decision in life was marrying Sarah. I wish I could have understood this 20 years ago. Sarah hugged Margaret with tears. "Better late than never," she whispered. That night, Margaret visited her son's grave. "David, I finally understand, son. Sarah is truly perfect. I wish I could have seen this 20 years ago. But now I'm trying to make up for it. Together with Sarah and Emma, we'll keep your memory alive."